The Presbyterian Book of Common Worship has never had a daily calendar of observances before, so sometimes I'm surprised by who shows up in it. This week I was surprised to see Michael Servetus remembered on the 27th, since he is not someone who was martyred for his Reformed faith. He was martyred by our Reformed ancestors. Let me tell you a little about him. He was Spanish, so his birth name was actually Miguel Servet. He was born around 1511 and is remembered as a theologian and a physician. As a young man, he attended the coronation of Emperor Charles V and was dismayed by the ostentation of the Pope and his retinue, and also by the Pope's worldly power. That helped nudge his thinking along Protestant lines, except that his rather complex view of the Trinity was judged to be heretical by both Catholic and Reformed Christians. In addition to studying and writing theology, Servetus studied medicine. Perhaps his most important contribution to science is his description of the pulmonary circulation of the blood. That is, he wrote about the heart carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs, where the blood receives oxygen, which is then distributed throughout the body. His contribution was little noticed at the time, since he described it in a theological work, The Restitution of Christianity. Servetus was also a skilled astronomer, predicting an occultation of Mars, and he was a student of law and mathematics. His principal concern, however, was to restore what he believed the Christian Church had lost by adopting the Nicene Creed's understanding of the Trinity. He published, sometimes in secret, to get his views across. Although they were not Unitarian, as we today understand Unitarianism, they inspired later Unitarians. He was put on trial for heresy by the Catholic Church. He escaped during the trial, and so after he was convicted, they burned him in effigy. He wanted John Calvin to accept his views, and many times he tried to arrange a meeting with Calvin to discuss them. At the end, he went to Geneva to talk with Calvin, where he was arrested, tried for heresy, and condemned to be executed. Many of us who consider ourselves Calvinists are dismayed that Calvin agreed to the execution of Michael Servetus. We should remember, however, the mood of the times. They believed that allowing the teaching of heresy would imperil the salvation of people. And let us give Calvin this much credit. The usual form of execution for heresy was burning at the stake, a long, painful, cruel way to die. Calvin argued for having Servetus beheaded instead, which was quick and relatively painless. Unfortunately, the City Council of Geneva was less merciful than John Calvin was, and Servetus was burned to death on October 27, 1553. On October 28th, our calendar names two obscure apostles, Simon and Jude. There's considerable disagreement about exactly who these men were, and the four Gospels do not agree with each other on the names or the identities of the apostles. That's why I want to call them to your attention. Sometimes those who serve God do so quietly, and even in some obscurity, but they serve God nonetheless. The Simon we remember is Simon the Zealot, a relatively prominent character in Jesus Christ's Superstar, but not so much in the Gospels. Since he was called a zealot, that means he was one of two things. Either he was super religious, very devoted to his Jewish observances, or he was a member of the Jewish militant groups that were trying to undermine the Roman Empire. Superstar assumes the latter, and I think it likely. After all, Jesus chose widely among his hundreds of disciples for the 12 he would call apostles. They included fishermen, a tax collector, and so it seems likely he would also include a former militia member. It is truly unclear who is meant by Jude, except that he is not the same person as Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. Jude and Judas are actually the same name. We call this guy Jude in order not to confuse people. There's a small, difficult book in the New Testament attributed to Jude, the brother of James, and it's traditionally believed to be the work of this apostle. That still doesn't help us know much about him. One of the things I enjoy about the book is the use of all sorts of stories and traditions that aren't in the Bible, including one that I mentioned to you about a month ago, the devil and the archangel Michael disputing with each other over the body of Moses. You can find that in the letter of Jude, verse 9. Finally, Saturday, October 31st, is a very special day. Well, I'm not talking about Halloween, although I love Halloween. I'm actually sorry that I'll be traveling and I'll miss trick-or-treat this year. October 31st we observe as Reformation Day. You may know the story, but I'm going to remind you of it. Martin Luther taught Bible at the University of Wittenberg, and the more he studied the Bible, the more he believed that many of the beliefs and practices of the Catholic Church had strayed from the truths of the gospel. He was particularly incensed by the practice of selling indulgences. If you gave money to help build the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome, then you could get one of your deceased relatives out of purgatory faster. He did not believe that salvation was for sale, or that any work of ours could save us. Salvation was the gift of the grace of God, available to us by faith. And so, on October 31st, 1517, Luther published a series of 95 statements called Theses for debate over the matter of indulgences. Because he dared to question something endorsed by the Catholic hierarchy, he found himself at odds with his superiors and subject to charges of heresy. If it had not been for a sympathetic patron, the Elector of Saxony, Frederick III, he may well have ended up like Michael Servetus. Instead, he began a movement that has had lasting repercussions for the work of the gospel. On the tower of the Castle Church at Wittenberg, where Luther is buried, are the words, "Ein Festeberg ist unser Gott." A mighty fortress is our God. Whenever I have chanced to sing these words in a Catholic church, I have marveled at how far we have come in understanding one another. And it is true for us all, in persecution and in other trouble. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper he, amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing.